Hello friends, Mark Johnson here. Welcome back to another episode of the TRIRIGA War Room, where experts advise. Hello friends, in this episode we are going to create a classification. So that's going to involve creating a classification business object and the includes for it, and the form and the includes for it, as well as the record data and the hierarchy for our classification. So classifications and lists, they get used kind of interchangeably a lot within TRIRIGA. So the reason why we're going to use classification here is in the future we're planning on adding some additional field values that'll help provide additional information about our classification. We're going to create a classification for the different sports. And then one of the field values we'll put in the future, we'll do a list, and we'll go through the creation of a list in a separate video. But it's going to be, the list will be whether it's a team sport or an individual sport. And then our classification is going to be our list of sports, things like, football, softball, basketball, bowling, whatever, golf, soccer, So that's going to be what we do in this particular video. So you will understand the process of creating a classification. Because again, it's very similar to what we've already done in creating the business object as well as a form. So there's just a couple of extra steps, and that's the includes. So we'll go ahead and get ourselves started and get logged in. All right. So for a classification, we want to create a new business object. So we need to go to the data modeler tool. And we are going to go to the classification module. So from the classification module, we'll select new and business object. And we're going to call this guy, well, we've already got CSC Sport, so we're just going to call this one Sport. It's going to be our Sport classification. And again, standalone. We don't need a staging table. It's not going to have a calendar. We're not going to do any auditing. And that should be good enough for now. So the classifications, as you can see, right, this isn't the first business object. So what happens when you create a business object inside of a module that's not the first one, and is it inherits from its base BO. So there's a lot of stuff here, a lot of noise on this particular base BO. Now, I like to go in and kind of clean this up, especially with the associations, right? Because my sport classification isn't going to have anything to do with climate zone or carbon sink or certifications or clause section category. See all these is parent of, right? Well, that's coming from the root node, right? Well, this isn't the root node. I don't need to be a parent of these things. So I like to go in and clean these up, keep it looking nice, right? Only keep those things which really are important. It's not a proposed site. It's not for property. Location, located in location. Potentially, depending on what the classification is, that might make sense to keep. Our system record keeper, definitely we want to keep. This has nothing to do with assets or previous status. And it's not doing anything with RE payment adjustments or logs. And the people auto recorded by, we'll keep that. The project contained, that's kind of a standard association, so we want to keep that. And routing has notification, right? This is important if you're doing notifications on this particular object. So I am going to go ahead and delete these associations. There we go. That looks a lot better. Now, the reason why I like to clean these up is because when I see an association, that tells me that this object has a relationship to another object, right? Well, if there's never going to be a relationship to that other object, why have it defined on my object? Now, the counter argument for that is, well, you should have all the associations that are on the base BO on each BO inside that module, right? So that, in workflow or when you have module level things, that they can, they can work right. Because if you try to walk an association, and it's not defined, you'll get an error, right? If you try to set a field that doesn't exist, you'll get an error. So And I'm going to also clean up some of these fields. All right, business object I'll keep. In the note field, the color, the control number, created description, form ID, yep, form label, you're sure, like it. Language, life expectancy, right? That has nothing to do with my object, so I'm not going to keep it. Modified name, the parent ID, the path, percent building cost. See, we got some specific, we have some very specific fields and associations that are here that were added to our base BO. And the reason probably for that was because they were trying to use some sort of module level workflow or something else, and the only way you're going to get your fields to show up is if it's on the base BO. So sometimes this is actually a sign of bad development, that, you know, because it's not always easy to walk and go from your base BO or your module level down to the BO level. So sometimes you have to get creative, right? You use a query task and you just return the type of object and you filter it based off of the record ID, right? So it's kind of an extra step, but then once you do that, now you have a handle on that same object, but you have it at the object level rather than at the module level. And then you can map and do some of these different things. So there are things that you can do. It's a few extra steps, but it leaves your system cleaner, and you're not using and putting these very specific fields on every BO that gets created in that module after that point in time. So you always look for a balance, right? Sometimes it may make more sense to put it on the base BO so that you have a bunch of module of things that's available on, and then you modify one business object rather than 30 workflows. Okay, that makes sense to me. So it's never hard and fast rules, right? Just always look for what's the best for this scenario for what I'm doing. So I don't need the rating, and we don't need a renewal percent or replacement cost. I'll leave reporting name there. And I'll leave the service assignment matrix. We're not going to have a service assignment matrix hooked up to this, but I'll still go and just leave that there. So I'm just going to delete a few fields. Right, so it's always best to get these things cleaned up, especially before you get to the point where you OM them, because once you OM the object over, right, you cannot remove fields via an OM package. You'd have to go in and manually do that. All right, so we have the fields. We don't need to add anything new here because we're just going to really rely on the name for now. Once we get to the point and we go and add the list field, which will probably be in a separate video, and then we'll come back and we'll modify this and add our list field and point to our list. So the next thing we need to do is come to our published name. So that's under BO mapping, and we're going to come to the name and we're going to find it. And by rule, it's the name field is what we use. So because this is a hierarchy, it's actually going to be a combination. So although we're only selecting the name field here, it's the hierarchy as well. So what this is going to say is that, hey, we can only have one child with a given name, right? You can have the same name in use in different areas of the hierarchy, right? You can have a grandparent and a grandchild with the same name, or grandparent and a child with the same name. You just can't have two children with the same name. So everyone outside of George Foreman should be okay. So we're going to start with 1 million on our numbering, and then we don't need to set anything else. We're not going to set any of the prefixes or suffixes. So let's go ahead and save our mapping. And now that that's there, we're going to come back to our association, and we need to create our includes. So we're going to come up and we're going to do new association. Now, when you're doing an include, you always want to have your business object in revision. There have been versions in the past that if the business object was not in revision and it was published, you would go through and create the include, and everything would look right on the screen, but underneath the covers and the things weren't hooked up correctly, and it was problematic. Now, I don't know if that issue has since been fixed. That's one of the drawbacks of having worked in TRIRIGA for so long, is you learn and you develop development habits, right, that protect you from certain things. And you don't always go back and try those against each new version to make sure that they still make sense. So because I want this to work, I've got this in revision. And this coincidentally also happens to be the same reason why I always do my associations in the data modeler, and I never use the association manager tool. But the association manager tool is there, but you cannot do the includes there. All right, so we want to define our include, which is just the parent-child relationship, right? So the fact that we're going to have a sport root node and we want to create the sports underneath that root node means that our sport business object has to be a parent to itself, right? So that you can create the same type of object underneath it. So type is parent of. Now, by default, the system's going to go ahead and populate in the is child of. You notice that this is grayed out. I can't even select it. Now, the only thing I can select is the associated business object, which I'm going to set to sport. Now, in older versions of TRIRIGA, this didn't used to auto-populate, and then you still had to go and set the is child of. So it does it now, which is kind of nice. Now we've got the dependent flag, which we could check so that if we delete the root node, it deletes all the other ones. I'm not going to check it, just kind of an extra layer of protection in case somebody deletes the wrong thing. So I'm going to save the association. So now the include shows up over here in my association list in blue, right? That's how I know it's an include. So this is the step that's different from a standard business object creation, right? So the other thing that I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to go to my classification root node, and I'm going to need to be able to add and include there. So I'm going to go ahead and define the reverse association here as well. So is child of, and it's going to be the classification, the base BO classification, and is parent of. Alright, so I've defined my reverse association bag. So now I have everything that I want on this business object, so I can go ahead and publish it. Oh, published name isn't present. So obviously I forgot to hit save on my published name, so we'll go right back into our BO mapping. Again, we're just going to set it to name. So record information, name. Okay, it's there. Save the mapping, publish the BO. So if I come back here, CST Sport, I see the revise is linked, right? And the publish, there's no link there, so I know my BO is now published. So now I'm going to go to my classification root, and I'm going to revise the business object, and then I'm going to say new association, and is parent of, because we're adding the include, and it's the parent of CST Sport. So it's very important to put the includes on the business objects, because the includes that are on the business object are going to limit what includes you can set on the form. So you have to put it on the business object first, and then once it's on the business objects, then you can add it to the respective forms. I don't need to add anything else here. I'm going to go ahead and publish my business object. Now, just be aware that adding this association is not changing my object label. So if I hadn't modified my classification business object before, then I would want to make some sort of change to it. And in this case, it does say that's in progress. That's great. That's what I want. Because when I go to create my OM package, I need to make sure that I add this in, right? If you don't add in this classification base BO, then what's going to happen is when you move your object into the next system and you go to create an instance of that record type, you're not going to be able to do it because that record isn't going to be a valid type underneath the root node, the classification root. So we've created our classification, business object. Now we just want to go and create our form. So let's go back to our tools menu, and we'll go to our form builder, and we're going to copy our classification. So it'll say try classification. Let's just drop this down and show us some more forms. So try classification. In some really old versions, they just say classification. But that's the form, it's try classification. So I'm going to copy it and use this as a template for my sport. So I'm going to set my target to CST Sport, and I'm going to call this CST Sport. So because I am copying this form, right, you see the label still says classifications, right? You will forget to update this label a lot. And this is going to cause you confusion and cause potential problem for you, right? Because the label is what shows in the UI when you select in the classification, the drop-down to create a new object type, right? And so you'll go and you're going to click on new, and you're not going to see your type there, even though you have your include created. So then you have to come back and say, look at your form and go, oh, that's why, right? Because classification is already there to show once, right? So I've made that mistake too many times to count. So just be aware of it whenever you're copying, right? You always need to go in and change the label. So let's get our form open and let's go and change that right now. So we'll call this sport. So I can click on the general, see the name is a required field. That's what we want. We actually don't need to do anything else to this right now as far as layout. Again, if we go and we add our list field, then we'll want to add it in here. We'll come back and do that. So the next thing we need to do is we need to come back here to the includes and forms. And notice that there are nothing defined here. So we need to go ahead and click on add. And you see, right, our only choice is what's defined on the business object. All right, this is why you have to do the business object first. Okay. So watch out for the label. So this label here will override the label that's on the form to show what's in that drop-down list. So because I didn't save this here first, I tagged off of it, it didn't save. So I'm going to go ahead and hit apply now. So it just brought in what was there, right? That's another common mistake that I wanted to show and demonstrate for you guys. So just pay attention. Again, we'll come over here, we'll hit apply because I left this page also without hitting apply. So whenever you're doing your include, just verify that the label matches what you want. You don't really worry about the font, the size, and all that. Alright, so we have our include. Come back to the layout tab, and now we can publish our form. So, are we done? Well, we're done with the sport. So just like we had to define here on this form that, hey, a record that's created with this form can create other records of the sport type. Well, now we need to go to the form for our base BO and say that we can create the sport type underneath it. So let's come back down to try classification. And we will have to revise this. And we'll come to the include forms. So I'm going to click add. And there's our CST Sport. Okay, so I have already published my sport form, right? Because you have to have that published before you can do this, right? So I can verify my label is correct. Doesn't say classification. None of this really matters on the font stuff, but just to keep things consistent, I will go ahead and select it, and I will hit apply. And then I'm going to come back to the layout, and I'm going to publish this guy. So just to do my classification, I've had to modify 2 BOs and 2 forms. Right? So you would need to track this, right, for when you go to build your object migration package. Now, the best practice is that for every object that you modify, that you would go and you would update a tracker that has the information for the object that you've modified. And then when you go to build your OM package, you would build it from your tracker and manually add in the objects, and not just rely in the modified by date or the modified by person and company. All right, so come back here to classification. Now you see that the object label changed in progress. That's good. So now I have done the classification base BO and its form, as well as my sport BO and its form. So now I should be good to go ahead and start creating a few classifications. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll come back to tools. We'll go to our classifications right here. So again, what that include did for us is it defined what can be created at the base level of our classification. Now, it's not unusual for this to take a bit of time to load because there are a lot of classifications there. So right now it's on the classification on the base BO, right? So if I click new, I have this whole list of stuff there, right? So I should be able to scroll down here and find sport. Because we said that we could create the sport type, and look, there it is. Right, so that defined what I can create, and then well, it created a record, but look, it's read only. I can't do anything. All I can do is close it. What could be wrong? Well, this is also another common mistake that happens, right? So when you're copying the BO or the form, you need to check the state family. So we will come back to our tools and data modeler. So you'll go through this iteration probably the first few times as you go to create classifications and stuff, and then after a while, then you'll be able to come back and just get it right, most likely on the first time. So let's look at our sport, and we'll just click on tools, and we're just going to look at the BO state transition, right? So we do have BO state transitions here, right? And that's what we inherited. So that's good. So we'll click on close. So we'll go to the form builder, which is where our problem is. And we'll click on revise, and then if we come into the state transition, look, all there is save and close. So this goes back to how does the platform work? So this is a key, right? What makes a record read-only? Well, you have to have at least one state transition that's available that is not read-only that leaves that state. Well, this is the active state. So if it starts off in the active state, there's no transition that leaves a state because there's no other state, right? So that meets the definition for the record to be read-only. That's why it was read-only, right? And so what we need to do is we need to come and hit find. And let's add in the rest of our state transitions. All right. Now we have in the rest of our state transitions. So if I save this, and then I'll go and publish it. Now when we create it, we'll come and we'll start off here in the null state, right? And we'll have the create task available to us, right? Because if we look here, right, the create task is not read-only. So for the null state, there's at least one transition that leaves that state and goes to another state that's not read-only. So that will make this transition or this state editable. So let's go back to our layout. We'll hit publish. All right, I think I've covered all the most common mistakes that get made in creating a classification. So let's go back now. And we'll go to our classification. And we need to add our sport root node. So by default, we're going to give it the name. Oops, I need to scroll back up here. And it's off the screen, so let's go ahead We'll go to Tools. 3, 2, 1. All right, and so we'll go back to classifications. And so in the classification, we'll select our root node and we'll select new. We're going to create our sport root node now. So we'll scroll down to sport. And there we go. We got a record. Uh-oh. There's upload hidden there. So we do have a mistake for some reason on the base object. That's not checked. So they obviously, set it via the form. We'll fix that here in just a minute though. So by default, right, we're going to set our root node to match the name of our object. So I'm going to say sport and I'm going to hit create. My record closed. I will now have a sport. And there we go. So you see, right, there's no plus, I can't expand it. There's no children underneath it. So we will create children underneath it. So now I will select sport, and then I select new, and I can select another sport, right? This is why we had to create the includes and point it to ourselves, right? And say that sport is a parent of sport, so that we could create sports under our sport root node. So I'm going to say new sport, and we'll do baseball. And we'll do, say, football. We can create a bunch of different sports, but for now, I'm going to go and fix our little mistake. I'm going to go fix it at the form level. We'll go to our sports, we'll revise, we'll go to our state transition, and let's make our upload hidden really hidden. So we'll take off the default display, save, back to the layout, publish. Alright, now that's published, that should be the version that's in use. So as we go back to our classification, we'll add just a couple more sports and then we'll be done. So that's one of the problems with tagging off of here. But if you just stay on here and you do everything in another window, then your hierarchy tree doesn't always refresh. And sometimes if you're bouncing back and forth, you can run into a cache issue where you have to clear your cache before you see things here, or you have to go on the server and have it rebuild the hierarchy cache. Alright, so we can see we've got baseball, football, new. So sport is still selected, so I can create a new sport. And let's do something like bowling and create. So notice that the upload hidden was gone. New sport. I'm going to say soccer. Alright, sorry to all you football fans around the world, it's soccer. And we'll do one more, and we'll call it tennis. So I've created a few different sports here, right? So when I go and create my list field about, hey, is this a single person sport or is it a team sport? You know what? Let's do at least one more because we got to have at least a couple single person sports. We'll say golf. All right. So we've got a few different sports. So I've got at least a couple sports that I can say, hey, they're individual sports, golf and bowling. Although sometimes in golf you do teams, it's still overall a individual sport, and it's a combination of individuals that make up for the team, right? Whereas in football, right, you're not going to play it with just one player. So when we create our list, we can set and define, okay, what's a single person sport, what's a multi-person sport or team sport versus individual sport, and we'll go from there. And that is going to be it for our classification. Again, if you want to go and look at any of these, we can open up. Right, and we see the hierarchy path, classification, sport, bowling. Let's just go ahead and let's try and create, and we'll call it football again. And look, I can't, right? We got name conflict, right? Because again, in the classification, the name is what's in the published name, right? Under the BO mapping. But it's a combination of the name and the level. So I can't create another football there right underneath sport. However, if I wanted to, I could come down to football. So let me scroll down and we'll expand our sport tree here. So notice we've got a plus now. We can expand it. So let's go under football. And I'll say new sport. And I'll say football. Look, I can create it, no problem, right? There are different levels in the hierarchy. That's fine. We're not running into a name collision at that level of the hierarchy. So you can't have siblings with the same name. So other than George Foreman, this should work for everybody else. So I don't really want to have this football record. I was just doing that to kind of show you. So I'm going to come over here and delete it. Oh, it's going to tell me I can't delete it. Alright, well then let's go open it up. And we'll delete it here. There we go. So now I've deleted that record, but you know, if football is a classification, right, I could go under football and I could, you know, do, Canadian football, arena football, however I want to break things up. So for now, let's leave everything at a high level, and that's going to be it for classifications. So in a next video, we'll go ahead and we'll create the list. We'll add it to our classification. That'll only take us a few minutes. And now that we have this classification built, we'll be able to use it on the next business objects that we create in our sports module. So thank you for watching, and I appreciate you guys' time and comments. We'll see you soon for the next one. All right, friends, that wraps up another episode of the TRIRIGA War Room. Thank you for watching this episode. If you like these videos and you find them helpful, please do like and subscribe to the channel. Your subscriptions are the only way that I have to know if you find these videos helpful and if I should continue to make them or not. I do these videos on my own time. I'm not currently compensated in any way for them. So if they're not helpful, I'd much rather go and work on some of my other side projects. So here at the TRIRIGA War Room, we really do want to be your expert advisors and to help you to better implement and use TRIRIGA. So if you have any ideas for future videos, or even if you would like to guest instruct a future video, please do let me know. Again, thanks for watching. We look forward to seeing you next time.